just how much data about you do governments have? And how comfortable are you with that trade-off of security versus transparency versus just your privacy in general? And that's what we're talking about this week on the show. How comfortable are you with your data being accessed by governments? So to debate that, we have Tegan Jones, the editor of Gizmodo, and from the Biteside Podcasting Network, Seamus Byrne. Seamus, as you look at how much access to our data that governments have, I guess what are the points that make you uncomfortable?
When we think about businesses, we talk about all this sort of social media stuff and all the rest. We've got leaderships that are in place for long periods of time, pointing these things in the one direction. It is actually kind of difficult with government where, we have sort of changing leadership, not only in changes of government, but then in between sort of government changes. We'll even, I think in the last term of government, we had like 5 different innovation ministers, looking after kind of digital things over the course of that government. And it takes a long time to know how to sort of point these things in the right direction. So when it comes to trying to make sure that we get these issues right, I think it's really difficult. And so I think the big one for me in government is around the use of open data systems. I think they inherently feel like it's a good thing to use, citizen data across all sorts of government systems to help people and researchers and companies to kind of build interesting things based on that data. But I think there's some really interesting arguments for the idea that it's one thing to give that away to the citizens for free. It's another thing to give it to businesses for free who can then build businesses on top of that and then sell it back to people because they've built all this extra value without ever having had to pay a cent for something that technically we kind of own.
To play devil's advocate, if you introduce a cost from the outset for access, do you disincentivize innovation with that public data? Imagine you're a startup being like, I want to use the train data to generate a fancy new app and it'll be better and everyone will use it, but I don't know if it's going to work or take off, and I'm definitely not going to pay X amount of money for that government data until I know.
It's a really good question. I think the way that you can do that sort of thing though is you run like hackathons is kind of the obvious kind of buzzword. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll get my coat. But the idea of actually saying, we want to encourage new ideas, but if an international conglomerate turns up and says, great, we'll just scrape out that data now and put it to whatever purpose, is that necessarily the right idea? So in the same way that we offer, funding and incentives to small companies to help them get a leg up, there's probably ways in which to say, let people pitch us with ideas and let's encourage them to do that. And it's not that we're going to give them money, but we might give them free access to really useful data.
Tegan Jones of Gizmodo fame. Where do your concerns lie?
The assistance and access bill of last year was certainly one of them for me.
Okay, so for people that haven't heard of it before, take us back to the beginning of that and what it is.
Sure. On the last day of Parliament, the government was trying to push through the assistance and access bill. If it passed, it would allow the government to force companies such as WhatsApp, Apple, Samsung, pretty much anyone with an app, to build backdoors into their apps. So for whatever reason, the government could access that data if they felt like they needed to. They said it was for, the likes of counterterrorism and for cybersecurity, but of course there's no judicial oversight on it. They could basically do it for whatever reason they wanted. It was rushed. There was not enough legislation to protect people around it, and it was downright scary. The amount of power that it would give.
And so what was the end result out of that for those playing along at home? Like, what's happened with that bill?
The law was passed and we do now have laws on the books that say the government can compel a company to do whatever it takes to decrypt information, even though sometimes that is literally impossible because that's not how encryption works. But in that process, what's happened is, we have a law that isn't really ever going to be able to do what they say it's going to do, or it could potentially do that to Australian software developers because they're the one kind of company that is under, enough of our jurisdiction that they wouldn't just say, bugger off, we're not doing that for you. And so in that process
Which is the problems because WhatsApp's and those companies,
why would they care?
Their servers, their offices, everything's somewhere else.
They're actually now saying they have their international customers saying, well, this actually feels a little bit like worrying about Chinese companies and the way in which they might be forced to backdoor something. So they're like, we have a sales problem for our export business, and that's a huge part of being, a giant international company.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that too is when we're talking about compelling companies to build backdoors, it was in the side of like, we'll just, absolutely charge you like $10 million, I think it was at the time, if you do not comply with us. So, that's quite a incentive for people to potentially comply with that law. But yeah, it's just scary. And it kind of just went away in the news. That's what kind of concerns me a little bit.
Technically in some kind of a review process, not that the law has gone away, but rather that it's currently in a review, and maybe this, like March next year, I think is when the review should report back on whether or not it's considered overreach.
Well, we will definitely be there to follow that story when it does become public. Hey, we are out of time. There is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show, and it is available for you right now. Thanks, guys.